Hey, today we're going to cover a few things related to your Ignite Design gas truck. Specifically, I have a Team Associated T6.2 with the Ignite Design RC gas truck conversion. So the first thing we're going to cover today is transmission durability upgrades, and that's going to vary depending on the type of engine you run and surface. The second thing we're going to talk about is different piston and shock oil tuning options that are available. The third thing we're going to cover is weight bias and what is the preferred weight bias depending on the type of surface and track as well as power plant that you're using in your truck. The last thing we're going to cover today is different suspension arm and suspension tuning options available from Team Associated. So without further ado, let's get started. So as I said, I have a Team Associated T6.2 based Ignite Design gas truck. This truck actually started life out as a T6.2, and I actually converted the front and rear suspension to T6.1 flat arms. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. But to start with, let's talk a little bit about some of the durability upgrades that you can do to your transmission. And the requirement for that's going to vary depending on the level of grip you have as well as the horsepower of your engine. The one thing that I do recommend, no matter what type of surface, what level of horsepower you're running in your truck, is run a metal idler gear. So in this case, you can see a plastic gear. I believe this one's actually for a laydown. In this case, these plastic idler gears, it's just a matter of time. Even if you're running a OS 12TG, which has 0.80 horsepower on low grip surface, you will still eventually strip this out. So one thing I do recommend is upgrading to the metal idler gear. Once you upgrade the metal idler gear, you'll run into other issues. So the weak point then becomes the top shaft. In this case, to combat the top shaft and really the ball diff gear from stripping, what I do recommend is using a high quality grease. In this case, I found that actually the TOR black grease works very, very well. And as far as service intervals, what I do recommend is actually just popping off the top of your diff case and go ahead and put a fresh bead of black grease on your ball diff gear. And that's probably enough. Now, if it's a fresh build, in that case, I would be pretty liberal with the amount of grease that you're using. The third option, or the third upgrade I do recommend, is a hardened steel ball diff gear. Now, with that being said, only if you're running on high grip surface and or have a high horsepower engine. The reason I say this is these steel ball diff gears, so this one actually only has about 16 or 17 minutes of runtime on it, to give you an idea. And the ball diff itself feels smooth still, and this is at the race setting that I run it at, which is pretty tight. Now, as you can see here, has play in the ball diff, which is not good at all. And so what I've found is, I don't know if it's the carbide balls or the ball diff gear itself. One of the two, it either wows out the ball diff gear or the carbide balls lose their carbide coating, which causes it to have play like that. So you can see here's a brand new plastic gear diff, and it has like very, very minute amount of play. And this one's actually pretty loose right now too. I mean, it's got like no play to it. So that's how they should feel. So that's the only caveat with these. I don't know what the solution is to prevent that from happening, but it's definitely not ideal. It can lead to your diff getting really crunchy and then you lose traction. So really you would only run this, like for example, if you're running on high grip clay, or if you're on medium grip, for example, like a Blue Groove maybe, and you have a high horsepower engine, you may want to look at running this. I do know that if you're running like an OS speed motor at, like, for example, the Hobbyplex in Omaha, where they have extremely high grip there, even with a 12TG, I highly doubt you can even finish a qualifier without one of these hardened steel diffs. So just keep that in mind. Personally, for me, on outdoor surfaces, even when it's grooved up and I'm running a 12TG, I run the plastic gear and I've never had problems with it. So something just to keep in mind. again, you know, the black grease is probably the number one thing that you can do to combat stripping of gears. So the enemy of the transmission is going to be heat as well as friction. So if you can minimize friction, you reduce the heat, less chance of failure parts. So the other recommended upgrade is, so this is just the stock spur gear that comes with the Ignite kit, and the stock spur gear bushing, which is made out of like a Delrin type, machine Delrin type material. So Ignite Design has a new revised bushing, and it's made out of carbon fiber. I highly recommend this carbon fiber one. It really should be the first upgrade you do on the kit, is that bushing. So what you'll find is, when you look at this, look how like true the spur gear spins. So what happens is, the inside of this, and it's kind of hard to tell by looking at it, comparing the two, but this Delrin bushing, it actually wowls out in the inside. So what happens then is your spur gear does not spin true. Well, why is that a problem? Well, A, you can create binding, but also you can get too loose of gear mesh, and it'll cause you to strip spur gears constantly. So something to keep in mind. I've actually had a carbon fiber bushing in my truck now for about, I would say 3/4 of a gallon, and I have had 0 issues. So this part right here fixes the problem completely. So that's it on the transmission recommended upgrades. So the next thing we're going to cover here is weight bias. So as you can see on my truck, again, I run on a lower grip outdoor surface. It's just regular dirt, not clay or anything like that. So depending on the type of motor you run, you will change your weight bias. So the further towards the rear, the more rear grip you have, but it's not going to jump as well. And also, it'll actually cause a pendulum effect on high speed sweepers, or if there's like off camber turns, for example, it'll cause that rear end to want to swing out on you. So it can actually hurt your lap time. So the idea is you want to run the least amount of rear weight as you can in order to get the job done. In other words, have enough grip to get around the track. So in this case, what I'm running is, and I think I recommend this for just about any conditions, unless you're running on like AstroTurf, carpet, or if you're running on like a high grip clay type surface. Otherwise, you'll always run a brass seat block. So I think that is a critical piece right there. One of the other rear weight bias parts that I installed, these are made by Mod, and they are actually 10-gram brass diff height inserts. Not a requirement, but they definitely help. And the last thing is a brass D-block. These are really hard to find though, so it's not totally necessary, but definitely, you know, it can help, I guess. So now, let's say that you're running on a really low grip surface and you have a big power motor in your truck. In that case, you almost have to run this big Ignite block. Like I said, the only issue is these can cause a pendulum effect, but they definitely give you a very noticeable improvement in rear grip. So I would really only recommend this brass block if you're running, if you just are searching for grip and nothing's working. So, or if it's really loose and loamy and dusty conditions, you might want to go ahead and try this out and see what you think. Mind you, you are going to have to adjust your ride height because this thing weighs quite a bit. It's pretty heavy. So one of the other things you can do to adjust your weight bias is actually your wheelbase. So what I'm running now, and I think I recommend this no matter what type of engine you're running, run your arms shim back 2 millimeters. All right, so that's like giving it actually a little bit longer wheelbase, and it's pretty close to stock. I actually Dremel my arms 2 millimeters, so that way I can actually fit, as you can see in here, I have a 2 millimeter shim in here. So it allows me to adjust my wheelbase. I can put a 1 in front and back, or 2 in back, or 2 in front, whatever I need to do to adjust my truck to meet the current conditions on the track. The other thing you can do is adjust your hubs, your position on your hubs. So I actually run my hubs 2 millimeters forward, even though my arms are 2 millimeters back. So they essentially cancel out. The reason for that is, then, put that over here, then I can actually drill out less material in my arm, and it significantly increases the durability of the arms. In fact, when you do this, you'll have an arm last, several times at the track without cracking or having any issues, even if you have bad wrecks. Last time I was at the track, I actually got hit by a A-scale truggy at full speed on the straightaway in the rear end of the truck, and it didn't break an arm somehow, even though the truck went flying. So that really shows you how big of a difference it can make shimming your arms back and then compensating by shimming your rear hubs forward. So something else, to keep in mind depending on your conditions. Now, if you're in high grip scenario, you probably want to shim your arms back and then maybe leave your hubs at 1 and 1, so in the middle position. If you go any further back, you may actually end up reducing your rear grip to a point where even in high grip scenarios it would be a problem. So when it comes to wheelbase tuning, that directly affects your weight bias as well as your overall forward drive and how well your truck can handle bumps as well as high-speed corners like sweepers. So at the track I race at, we have a couple higher speed sweeper sections that lead right into a jump. So one of the problems I had with the short wheelbase is, yes, it gave me a ton of forward drive, and the truck would want to actually pull power wheelies on the straightaway, which is admittedly a lot of fun in a gas truck, but the problem is you'd get to the end of straightaway, slam on the brakes, and the rear end would want to swing out on you with that pendulum effect, right? Because I had so much rear weight bias. So what I did is I removed that big brass block and then shim my arms back 2 millimeters and then shim the rear hubs forward 2 millimeters. And basically the net result was I lengthened the wheelbase 2 millimeters by doing that. And then from there, I had no more pendulum effect. The truck still had plenty of traction with this OS12 TG. So it got the job done, essentially. It also had much more stability going over the bumps. So it went from having a really tough time clearing this first double that came out of a sweeper to being able to hit it basically every time, even in really low grip, dusty conditions, which was basically impossible before. So just a simple setup change. Here's some other things you can see, like the stock C and D blocks that come with the kit. Another thing, it's not really wheelbase, more of a rear track width thing. In the kit, it comes with these 8.5 millimeter hexes. So I like the 8.5s. I prefer them. I think they're a little more stable and give you more rear grip. But the problem is these little screws strip out. And I've been through like 3 sets of these things. It's just not worth it. You run the 7.0s and you don't have that problem anymore. The screws don't strip. These will last a really long time. So it's not that much of a difference in rear grip. I'll take the durability over the grip change any day of the week. So the next thing we're going to cover here is shock tuning. Let me get some of the stuff out of the way. So depending on the level of grip you have, the type of jumps you have, how smooth the surface is, you may make some changes to your pistons and oils in your shocks. So what I have found is I've actually been running the kit setup for the most part. Now the one thing I did change is I changed the oils and I changed the pistons depending on the type of track that I've been at. When I raced on high grip at the Hobbyplex in Omaha, for example, I still actually run the same oils in my shocks, which is I run 32.5 in the front, 32.5 in the rear. And that's based on the average temperature of around 70 to 75 degrees. If it gets really hot out, like in the 90s or something like that, you may want to step up to like a 35 weight. If it's really cold, like let's say in the 50s, you may want to step down to a 30 weight. So a lot of it just depends on, are you getting a lot of chassis slap? Is your truck feel like it's really loose going through the bumps, or do you not have enough suspension travel, going through the bumps? You may want to go to a lower oil. So something to keep in mind. As far as the pistons, so when I was in Omaha at the Hobbyplex, I actually ran the AE optional pistons. So in this case, I ran flat 3 by 1.4 millimeter hole pistons. So you can see these aren't tapered or anything. I ran these in the front, 2 of them. In the rear, I ran tapered 3 by 1.4 hole pistons. These are AE factory team options. And what I did is I ran the taper down. So you can see the flat side is up on the piston. So that's what I ran on high grip. Now in low grip, I actually prefer a little bit of a different setup. So I want the front end to have a little bit less pack, but at the same time, I want a lot of rebound. So when you're going over those rough areas and, you know, let's say there's ruts or, you know, you want basically the tire to maintain as much contact to the dirt as possible. So what I've found through a lot of testing is that I actually prefer a VRP game changer piston in both the front and rear. So in the front, I run the game changer pistons. These are 1.6 times 2 holes pistons. And you can see here on the back of the piston, it has a relief valve. You can see these little tiny holes here that allow the shock to have more rebound. I run those in the front. In the rear, I actually run, I don't have them in front of me actually, but I run 3 by 1.4 game changer VRP pistons. So these are actually 2 by 1.7s I have right here. So just to give you an idea of what they kind of look like, I run the 3 by 1.4s, which look like the optional associated ones, but they actually have that 2 relief valves built into the piston. It gives me a lot more pack, so when I'm landing from a really high jump, you know, the truck's more settled and it lands a little bit more plush. But at the same time, it still feels just as soft on the bench. So really, I'm not really giving up anything. I'm only gaining a benefit by running those pistons. So I do highly recommend that for outdoor if you're running your truck on like an A-scale track, for example. So the last thing I want to cover here is different types of suspension arms, towers, and such that you can run. So when I ran in Omaha at the Hobbyplex on high grip, I actually still ran the same rear end configuration, which is the T6.1 that I have on the truck now. So as you can see on the truck, T6.1 arms, T6.1 tower. It's actually 2 towers that are sandwiched together. And how I do that is I'm actually running longer screws, for the shock mounts, as well as for the body mount, run a longer screw as well, 4 millimeters longer. You can see here on the truck that with the double shock towers, one of the shock towers is actually cut on the bottom because we still want to mount only one of the shock towers, screw through that into the top of the diff case. So you're just screwing through the back tower into the diff case. The reason for that is you want to make sure that you still have the same angle for your shocks. And if you were to go through both shock towers, your shocks would be angled too far back, and that'll create bind in the suspension. So something to keep in mind. Now at Omaha, I did actually run the T6.2 front end. I thought it was a little better for the high grip scenario where you would actually want a gull wing style arm. So you can see the difference in the arms here. The gull wing is on top, and then the T6.1 flat arm is on bottom. So the flat arm is better whenever you're running on a rougher surface or outdoor type surface. That way it's for running a higher ride height, essentially. That's the benefit of it. You have to run the T6.2 tower though when you run these arms. Now also in Omaha, I was running the carbon front arms, and they're a little lighter, as well as a little stiffer. Just made the truck feel a little bit more precise. Now, if you do want to run the T6.2 rear end, which I've done a little bit of testing with it, and I haven't really found a good setup that I liked with it. Doesn't mean it's bad. I just think I need to do a little bit more testing though. So this is the T6.2 arms. As you can see, if you want to do that conversion, you are going to need the T6.2 tower. I would recommend getting 2 of them and doing the same thing with doubling them up on the rear end, and then dremeling off the bottom half as I done with the T6.1 tower. You'll also need the correct out drives, and you'll need the correct hubs. I have aluminum ones that I like to run. And then the last thing but not least, the hinge pin, the outer hinge pin is a little different. It's actually captured, which is a better design in my opinion. So here is a comparison. You can see the T6.2 versus the T6.1 arms. So T6.2 is the gull wing style arms. You can see how they actually, they're for running a lower ride height. All right, and that allows you to get at lower ride height to get the right suspension geometries. When you're running a higher ride height on like a rougher outdoor surface, you may want to run the T6.1 style arm. And mind you, if you do run the T6.1 arms, you're going to need the correct T6.1 out drives, and also you're going to need the correct T6.1 rear hubs. These rear hubs are roughly 4 millimeter wider than the T6.2 hubs. All right, so that allows you to get the correct track width with the T6.1 arms. Kind of hard to explain, but hopefully that makes sense. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. In the next video, we're going to do a little bit more talk about some of the linkage setup for your slide carburetor, as well as the brake setup, which is a little bit tougher. So look for that next video, as well as leave in the comments anything else that you'd like to see as far as a tutorial. If you could, leave me a like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. It goes towards making sure that I give you guys future really good content for you.